Book 1, Part 2 of The Art of War, by Niccolò Machiavelli, translated by Henry Neville. Recording by Clive Catterall. Book 1, Part 2. Cosimo said, "If we first desired to hear your discussions of these matters, truly, what you have said up to now redoubles that desire. We thank you, therefore, for what we have had, and ask you for the rest." Fabrizio said, "Since this is your pleasure, I want to begin to treat this matter from the beginning, being able in that way to demonstrate it more fully, so that it may be better understood. The aim of those who want to make war is to be able to combat in the field with every kind of enemy, and to be able to win the engagement. To want to do this, they must raise an army. In raising an army, it is necessary to find men, arm them, organize them, train them in small and large battle orders, lodge them, and expose them to the enemy afterwards, either at a standstill or while marching. All the industry of war in the field is placed in these things, which are the more necessary and honoured in the waging of war. And if one does well in offering battle to the enemy, all the other errors he may make in the conduct of the war are supportable. But if he lacks this organization, even though he be valiant in other particulars, he will never carry on a war to victory and honour. For as one engagement that you win cancels out every other bad action of yours, so likewise when you lose one, all the things you have done well before become useless. Since it is necessary, therefore, first to find men, you must come to the diletto draft of them, as thus the ancients called it, which we call the scelta, selection. But in order to call it by a more honoured name, I want us to preserve the name of diletto. Those who have drawn up regulations for war want men to be chosen from temperate countries, as they have spirit and are prudent. For warm countries give rise to men who are prudent but not spirited, and cold countries to men who are spirited but not prudent. This regulation is drawn up well for one who is prince of all the world, and is therefore permitted to draw men from those places that appear best to him. But wanting to draw up a regulation that any one can use, one must say that every republic and every kingdom ought to take soldiers from their own country, whether it is hot, cold, or temperate. For from ancient examples it is seen that in every country good soldiers are made by training, because where nature is lacking, industry supplies it, which in this case is worth more than nature. And selecting them from another place cannot be called Dell'arte, because Dell'arte means to say to take the best of a province, and to have the power to select as well those who do not want to fight as those who do want to. This Dell'arte, therefore, cannot be made unless the places are subject to you, for you cannot take whoever you want in the countries that are not yours, but you need to take those who want to come." Cosimo said, "And of those who want to come, it can even be said that they turn and leave you, and because of this, it can be called a diletto." Fabrizio said, "In a certain way you say what is true, but consider the defects that such a diletto has in itself, for often it happens that it is not a diletto. The first thing to consider is that those who are not your subjects and do not willingly want to fight are not of the best. Rather, they are of the worst of a province. For if they are troublesome, idle, without restraint, without religion, subject to the rule of the father, blasphemous gamblers, and in every way badly brought up, they are those who want to fight. And these habits cannot be more contrary to a true and good military life. When there are so many of such men offered to you that they exceed the number you have designated, you can select them. But if the material is bad, it is impossible for the diletto to be good, but many times it happens that they are not so many as are needed to fill the number you require, so that being forced to take them all, it results that it can no longer be called the making of a diletto, but an enlisting of infantry. The armies of Italy and other places are raised today with these evils, except in Germany, where no one is enlisted by command of the prince, but according to the wishes of those who want to fight. Think, therefore, what methods of those ancients can now be introduced in an army of men put together by similar means." Cosimo said, "What means should be taken, therefore?" Fabrizio said, "What I have just said, Select them from your own subjects, and with the authority of the prince. Cosimo said, Would you introduce any ancient form in those thus selected? Fabrizio said, You know well it would be so. If it is a principality, he who should command should be their prince, or an ordinary lord. Or, if it is a republic, a citizen, who for the time should be captain. Otherwise it is difficult to do the thing well. Cosimo said, Why? Fabrizio said, I will tell you in time. For now, I want this to suffice you, that it cannot be done well in any other way. Cosimo said, If you have, therefore, to make this diletto in your country, whence do you judge it better to draw them, from the city or the countryside? Fabrizio said, Those who have written of this all agree that it is better to select them from the countryside, as they are men accustomed to discomfort, brought up on hard work, accustomed to be in the sun and avoid the shade, know how to handle the sword, dig a ditch, carry a load, and are without cunning or malice. But on this subject my opinion would be that, as soldiers are of two kinds, afoot and on horseback, that those afoot should be selected from the countryside, and those on horseback from the city. Cosimo said, Of what age would you draw them? Fabrizio said, If I had to raise an entirely new army, I would draw them from 17 to 40 years of age. If the army already exists, and I had to replenish it, at 17 years of age always. Cosimo said, I do not understand this distinction well. Fabrizio said, I will tell you. If I should have to organize an army where there is none, it would be necessary to select all those men who are more capable, as long as they were of military age, in order to instruct them as I would tell them. But if I should have to make the diletto in places where the army was already organized, in order to supplement it, I would take those of 17 years of age, because the others, having been taken for some time, would have been selected and instructed. Cosimo said, Therefore you would want to make an ordinance, similar to that which exists in our countries. Fabrizio said, You say well. It is true that I would arm them, captain them, train them and organize them in a way I do not know whether or not you have organized them similarly. Cosimo said, Therefore you praise the ordinance? Fabrizio said, Why would you want me to condemn it? Cosimo said, Because many wise men have censured it. Fabrizio said, You say something contrary when you say a wise man censured the ordinance, for he can be held a wise man and to have censured them wrongly. Cosimo said, The wrong conclusion that he has made will always cause us to have such an opinion. Fabrizio said, Watch out that the defect is not yours, but his, as that which you recognized before this discussion furnishes proof. Cosimo said, You do a most gracious thing, but I want to tell you that you should be able to justify yourself better in that of which those men are accused. These men say thusly, either that it is useless, and our trusting in it will cause us to lose the state, or it is a virtue, and he who governs through it can easily deprive her of it. They cite the Romans, who by their own arms lost their liberty. They cite the Venetians and the King of France, of whom they say that the former, in order not to obey one of its citizens, employed the arms of others, and the king disarmed his people so as to be able to command them more easily. But they fear the uselessness of this much more, for which uselessness they cite two principal reasons: the one because they are inexpert, the other for having to fight by force, because they say that they never learn anything from great men, and nothing good is ever done by force. Fabrizio said, All the reasons that you mention are from men who are not far-sighted, as I shall clearly show. And first, as to their uselessness, I say to you that no army is of more use than your own, nor can an army of your own be organized except in this way. And as there is no debating over this, which all the examples of ancient history does for us, I do not want to lose time over it. And because they cite inexperience and force, I say, as it is true, that inept experience gives rise to little spirit, and force makes for discontent. But experience and enthusiasm gains for themselves the means for arming, training, and organizing them, as you will see in the first part of this discussion. But as to force, you must understand that as men are brought to the army by commandment of the prince, they have to come, whether it is entirely by force or entirely voluntarily. For if it were entirely from desire, there would not be a diletto, as only a few of them would go. So also the going entirely by force would produce bad results. Therefore a middle way ought to be taken, where neither the entirely forced or entirely voluntary means are used, but they should come drawn by the regard they have for the prince, where they are more afraid of his anger than the immediate punishment. And it will always happen that there will be a compulsion mixed with willingness, from which that discontent cannot arise which causes bad effects. Yet I do not claim that an army thus constituted cannot be defeated, for many times the Roman armies were overcome, and the army of Hannibal was defeated, so that it can be seen that no army can be so organized that a promise can be given that it cannot be routed. These wise men of yours therefore ought not to measure this uselessness from having lost one time, but to believe that just as they can lose, so too they can win, and remedy the cause of the defeat. And if they should look into this, they will find that it would not have happened because of a defect in the means, but of the organization which was not sufficiently perfect. And, as I have said, they ought to provide for you, not by censuring the organization, but by correcting it. As to how this ought to be done, you will come to know little by little. As to being apprehensive that such organization will not deprive you of the state by one who makes himself a leader, I reply that the arms carried by his citizens or subjects, given to them by laws and ordinances, never do him harm, but rather are always of some usefulness, and preserve the city uncorrupted for a longer time by means of these arms than without them. Rome remained free 400 years while armed, Sparta 800. Many other cities have been disarmed and have been free less than 40 years. For cities have need of arms, and if they do not have arms of their own, they hire them from foreigners, and the arms of foreigners more readily do harm to the public good than their own, for they are easier to corrupt, and a citizen who becomes powerful can more readily avail himself, and can also manage the people more readily, as he has to oppress men who are disarmed. In addition to this, a city ought to fear two enemies more than one. One who avails itself of foreigners immediately has to fear not only its citizens, but the foreigners that it enlists. And remembering what I told you a short while ago of Francesco Sforza, you will see that fear ought to exist. One which employs its own arms has not other fear except of its own citizens. But of all the reasons which can be given, I want this one to serve me, that no one ever established any republic or kingdom who did not think that it should be defended by those who lived there with arms. And if the Venetians had been as wise in this as in their other institutions, they would have created a new world kingdom. But who so much more merit censure, because they had been the first who were armed by their founders. And not having dominion on land, they armed themselves on the sea, where they waged war with virtue, and with arms in hand enlarged their country. But when the time came when they had to wage war on land to defend Venice, and where they ought to have sent their own citizens to fight on land, they enlisted as their captain a foreigner, the Marquis of Mantua. This was the sinister course which prevented them from rising to the skies and expanding. And they did this in the belief that, as they knew how to wage war at sea, they should not trust themselves in waging it on land. Which was an unwise belief, because a sea captain who is accustomed to combat with winds, water, and men, could more easily become a captain on land where the combat is with men only, than a land captain become a sea one. And my Romans, knowing how to combat on land and not on the sea, when war broke out with the Carthaginians, who are powerful on the sea, did not enlist Greeks or Spaniards experienced at sea, but imposed that change on those citizens they sent to fight on land, and they won. If they did this in order that one of their citizens should not become a tyrant, it was a fear that was given little consideration. For, in addition to the other reasons mentioned a short while ago concerning such a proposal, if a citizen skilled in the use of arms at sea had never been made a tyrant in a city situated in the sea, so much less would he be able to do this if he was skilled in the use of arms on land. And because of this they ought to have seen that arms in the hands of their own citizens could not create a tyrant, but the evil institutions of a government are those which cause a city to be tyrannized, and as they had a good government, did not have to fear the arms of their own citizens. They took an imprudent course, therefore, which was the cause of their being deprived of much glory and happiness. As to the error which the King of France makes in not having his people disciplined to war, from what has been cited from examples previously mentioned, there is no one devoid of some particular passion of theirs who does not judge this defect to be in the Republic, and that this negligence alone is what makes it weak. But I have made too great a digression, and have gotten away from my subject. Yet I have done this to answer you, and to show you that no reliance can be had on arms other than one's own, and one's own arms cannot be established otherwise than by way of an ordinance, nor can forms of armies be introduced in any place, nor military discipline instituted. If you have read the arrangements which the first kings made in Rome, and most especially of Servius Tullus, you will find that the institutions of classes is none other than an arrangement to be able quickly to put together an army for the defence of that city. But turning to our diletto, I say again that, having to replenish an established organisation, I would take the 17-year-olds, but having to create a new one, I would take them of every age between 17 and 40, in order to avail myself of them quickly. Cosimo said, "Would you make a difference of what profession you would choose them from?" Fabrizio said, "These writers do so, for they do not want that bird hunters, fishermen, cooks, procurers, and anyone who makes amusement his calling should be taken, but they want that, in addition to tillers of the soil, smiths and blacksmiths, carpenters, butchers, hunters, and such like should be taken. But I would make little difference in conjecturing from his calling how good this man may be, but how much I can use him with the greatest usefulness. And for this reason the peasants, who are accustomed to working the land, are more useful than anyone else. For of all the professions, this one is used more than any other in the army. After this are the forgers, smiths, carpenters, blacksmiths, shoemakers, of whom it is useful to have many, for their skills succeed in many things, as they are a very good thing for a soldier to have, from whom you would draw double service." Cosimo said, "How are those who are not suitable to fight chosen?" Fabrizio said, "I want to talk of the manner of selecting a new organisation in order to make it afterwards into an army, which yet also apply to the discussion of the selection that should be made in remanning an old, established organisation. I say, therefore, that how good the man is that you have to select as a soldier is recognized either from his experience, shown by some excellent deeds of his, or by conjecture. The proof of virtue cannot be found in men who are newly selected, and who never before have been selected, and of the former few or none are found in an organisation which is newly established. It is necessary, therefore, lacking experience, to have recourse to conjecture, which is derived from their age, profession, and physical appearance. The first two have been discussed. It remains to talk of the third. And yet I say that some have wanted that the soldier be big, among whom was Pyrrhus. Some others have chosen them only from the strength of the body, as Caesar did, which strength of body is conjectured from the composition of the members and the gracefulness of the aspect. And yet some of those who write say that he should have lively and merry eyes, a nervy neck, a large breast, muscular arms, long fingers, a small stomach, round hips, sleek legs and feet, which parts usually render a man strong and agile, which are the two things sought above everything else in a soldier. He ought, above all, to have regard for his habits, and that there should be in him a sense of honesty and shame. Otherwise there will be selected only an instrument of trouble and a beginning of corruption. For there is no one who believes that in a dishonest education and in a brutish mind there can exist some virtue which in some part may be praiseworthy. Nor does it appear to me superfluous, rather I believe it necessary, in order for you to understand better the importance of this selection, to tell you the method that the Roman consuls at the start of their magistracy observed in selecting the Roman legions, in which diletto, because those who had to be selected were to be a mixture of new and veteran men, because of the continuing wars, they proceeded from experience with regard to the old men, and from conjecture with regard to the new. And this ought to be noted, that these diletti are made either for immediate training and use, or for future employment. I have talked, and will talk, of those that are made for future employment, because my intention is to show you how an army can be organized in countries where there is no military organization, in which countries I cannot have diletti in order to make use of them. But in countries where it is the custom to call out armies, and by means of the prince, these diletti exist, as was observed at Rome, and is today observed among the Swiss. For in these diletti, if they are for the selection of new men, there are so many others accustomed to being under military orders, that the old and new, being mixed together, make a good and united body. Notwithstanding this, the emperors, when they began to hold fixed the term of service of its soldiers, placed new men in charge over the soldiers, whom they called tironi, as teachers to train them, as is seen in the life of the Emperor Maximus. Which thing, while Rome was free, was instituted not in the army, but within the city. And as the military exercises where the young men were trained were in the city, there resulted that those then chosen to go to war, being accustomed in the method of mock warfare, could easily adapt themselves to real war. But afterwards, when these emperors discontinued these exercises, it was necessary to employ the methods I have described to you. Arriving, therefore, at the methods of the Roman selection, I say that as soon as the Roman consuls, on whom it was imposed the carrying on of the war, had assumed the magistracy, in wanting to organize their armies, as it was the custom that each of them had 2 legions of Roman men, and were the nerve centre of their armies, created 24 military tribunes, proposing 6 for each legion, who filled that office which today is done by those whom we call constables. After they had assembled all the Roman men adept at carrying arms, and placed the tribunes of each legion apart from each of the others, afterwards by lot they drew the tribes, from which the first selection was to be made, and of that tribe they selected 4 of the best men, from whom 1 was selected by the tribunes of the first legion, and of the other 3 1 was selected by the tribunes of the second legion, and of the other 2 1 was selected by the tribunes of the third, and the last belonged to the fourth legion. After these 4 others were selected, of whom the first man was selected by the tribunes of the second legion, the second by those of the third by those of the fourth remained to the first. After, another 4 were chosen. The first man was selected by the tribunes of the third legion, the second by the fourth, the third by the first, the fourth remained to the second, and thus this method of selection changed successively, so that the selection came to be equal, and the legions equalized. And as we said above, this was done where the men were to be used immediately, and as it was formed of men of whom a good part were experienced in real warfare, and every one in mock battles, this diletto was able to be used on conjecture and experience. But when a new army was to be organized, and the selection made for future employment, this diletto cannot be based except on conjecture, which is done by age and physical appearance. Cosimo said, "I believe what you have said is entirely true, but before you pass on to other discussion, I want to ask about one thing which you have made me remember, when you said that the diletto which should be made where these men are not accustomed to fighting should be done by conjecture. For I have heard our organization censured in many of its parts, and especially as to number. For many say that a lesser number ought to be taken, of whom those that are drawn would be better, and the selection better, as there would not be as much hardship imposed upon the men, and some reward given them, by means of which they would be more content, and could be better commanded. Whence I would like to know your opinion on this part, and if you preferred a greater rather than a smaller number, and what methods you would use in selecting both numbers. Fabrizio said, "Without doubt, the greater number is more desirable and more necessary than the smaller. Rather, to say better, where a great number are not available, a perfect organization cannot be made, and I will easily refute all the reasons cited in favour of this. I say, therefore, first, that where there are many people, as there are, for example, in Tuscany, does not cause you to have better ones, or that the dell'arte is more selective. For desiring in the selection of men to judge them on the basis of experience, only a very few would probably be found in that country who have had this experience, as much because few have been in a war as because of those few who have been, very few have ever been put to the test. So that because of this they merit to be chosen before the others, so that whoever is in a similar situation should select them, must leave experience to one side, and take them by conjecture. And if I were brought to such a necessity, I would want to see if 20 young men of good physical appearance should come before me, with what rule I ought to take some or reject some. So that, without doubt, I believe that every man will confess that it is a much smaller error to take them all in arming and training them, being unable to know beforehand which of them are better, and to reserve to oneself afterwards to make a more certain diletto, where during the exercises with the army those of greater courage and vitality may be observed. So that, considering everything, the selection in this case of a few in order to have them better is entirely false. As to causing less hardship to the country and to the men, I say that the ordinance, whether it is bad or insufficient, does not cause any hardship. For this order does not take men away from their business, and does not bind them so that they cannot carry on their business, because it only obliges them to come together for training on their free days, which proposition does not do any harm either to the country or the men. Rather to the young it ought to be delightful, for where on holidays they remain basely indolent in their hangouts, they would now attend these exercises with pleasure, for the drawing of arms, as it is a beautiful spectacle, is thus delightful to the young men. As to being able to pay more to the lesser number, and thereby keeping them more content and obedient, I reply that no organization of so few can be made who are paid so continually that their pay satisfies them. For instance, if an army of 5,000 infantry should be organized, in wanting to pay them so that it should be believed that they will be contented, they must be given at least 10,000 ducats a month. To begin with, this number of infantry is not enough to make an army. The payment is unendurable to the state. And on the other hand, it is not sufficient to keep the men content and obligated to respect your position. So that in doing this, although much would be spent, it would provide little strength, and would not be sufficient to defend you, or enable you to undertake any enterprise. If you should give them more, or take more, so much more impossible would it be for you to pay them. If you should give them less, or take on fewer, so much less would be content, and so much less useful would they be to you. Therefore, those who consider things which are either useless or impossible. But it is indeed necessary to pay them when they are levied to send to war. But even if such an arrangement should give some hardship to those enrolled in it in times of peace, which I do not see, they are still recompensed by all those benefits which an army established in a city brings, for without them nothing is secure. I conclude that whoever desires a small number in order to be able to pay them more, or for any other reason cited by you, does not know what he is doing. For it will also happen, in my opinion, that any number will always diminish in your hands because of the infinite impediments that men have, so that the small number will succeed at nothing. However, when you have a large organisation, you can, at your election, avail yourself of few or of many. In addition to this, it serves you in fact and reputation, for the large number will always give you a reputation. Moreover, in creating the organisation, in order to keep men trained, if you enrol a small number of men in many countries, and the armies are very distant from each other, you cannot, without the gravest injury to them, assemble them for joint exercises. And without this training the organisation is useless, as will be shown in its proper place. Cosimo said, "What you have said is enough on my question, but I now desire that you resolve another doubt for me. There are those who say that such a multitude of armed men would cause confusion, trouble, and disorder in the country." Fabrizio said, "This is another vain opinion, for the reason I will tell you. Those organised under arms can cause disorders in two ways, either among themselves or against others. Both of these can be obviated where discipline by itself should not do so. For, as to troubles among themselves, the organisation removes them, not brings them up, because in the organisation you give them arms and leaders. If the country where you organise them is so unwarlike that there are not arms among its men, and so united that there are no leaders, such an organisation will make them more ferocious against the foreigner, but in no way will make it more disunited, because men well organised, whether armed or unarmed, fear the laws, and can never change unless the leaders you give them cause a change. And I will later tell you the manner of doing this. But if the country where you have organised an army is warlike and disunited, this organisation alone is reason enough to unite them. For these men have arms and leaders for themselves, but the arms are useless for war, and the leaders causes of troubles. But this organisation gives them arms useful for war, and leaders who will extinguish troubles. For as soon as someone is injured in that country, he has recourse to his leader of the party, who, to maintain his reputation, advises him to avenge himself, and not to remain in peace. The public leader does the contrary, so that by this means the causes for trouble are removed and replaced by those for union. And provinces which are united but effeminate or unwarlike lose their usefulness but maintain the union, while those that are disunited and troublesome remain united. And that disordinate ferocity which they usually employ is turned to public usefulness. As to desiring that they do us injury against others, it should be kept in mind that they cannot do this except by the leaders who govern them. In desiring that the leaders do not cause disorders, it is necessary to have care that they do not acquire too much authority over them. And you have to keep in mind that this authority is acquired either naturally or by accident. And as to nature, it must be provided that whoever is born in one place is not put in charge of men enrolled in another place, but is made a leader in those places where he does not have any natural connections. As to accidents, the organisation should be such that each year the leaders are exchanged from command to command. For continuous authority over the same men generates so much unity among them, which can easily be converted into prejudice against the prince. As to these exchanges being useful to those who have employed them, and injurious to those who have not observed them, is known from the example of the kingdom of Assyria and from the empire of the Romans, in which it is seen that the former kingdom endured 1,000 years without tumult and without civil war, which did not result from anything else than the exchange of those captains who were placed in charge of the care of the armies from place to place every year. Nor for other reasons did it result in the Roman Empire. Once the blood of Caesar was extinguished, so many civil wars arose among the captains of the armies, and so many conspiracies of the above-mentioned captains against the emperors, resulting from the continuing of those captains in their same commands. And if any of those emperors, and any who later held the empire by reputation, such as Hadrian, Marcus, Severus, and others like them, would have observed such happenings, and would have introduced this custom of exchanging captains in that empire, without doubt he would have made it more tranquil and lasting. For the captains would have had fewer opportunities for creating tumults, and the emperors fewer causes to fear them, and the Senate, when there was a lack in the succession, would have had more authority in the election of emperors, and consequently better conditions would have resulted. But the bad customs of men, whether from ignorance or little diligence, or from examples of good or bad, are never put aside. Cosimo said, "I do not know if, with my question, I have gone outside the limits you set. For from the dell'arte we have entered into another discussion, and if I should not be excused a little, I shall believe I merit some reproach." Fabrizio said, "This did us no harm, for all this discussion was necessary in wanting to discuss the organization of an army, which, being censured by many, it was necessary to explain it, if it is desired that this should take place before the dell'ate. And before I discuss the other parts, I want to discuss the dell'ate for men on horseback. This selection was done by the ancients from among the more wealthy, having regard both for the age and quality of the men, selecting 300 for each legion, so that the Roman cavalry in every consular army did not exceed 600. Cosimo said, "Did you organize the cavalry in order to train them at home and avail yourself of them in the future?" Fabrizio said, "Actually, it is a necessity, and cannot be done otherwise, if you want to have them take up arms for you, and not to want to take them away from those who make a profession of them." Cosimo said, "How would you select them?" Fabrizio said, "I would imitate the Romans. I would take the more wealthy, and give them leaders in the same manner as they are given to others today, and I would arm them and train them." Cosimo said, "Would it be well to give these men some provision?" Fabrizio said, "Yes, indeed, but only as much as is necessary to take care of the horse; for, as it brings an expense to your subjects, they could complain of you. It would be necessary, therefore, to pay them for the horse and its upkeep." Cosimo said, "How many would you make? How would you arm them?" Fabrizio said, "You pass into another discussion. I will tell you in its place, which will be when I have said how the infantry ought to be armed, and how they should prepare for an engagement." End of Book 1.